Hearing your own mother casually announce that you are the absolute lowest priority in the family changes something deep inside you. It was not shouted during a massive argument, but rather spoken with a chilling calmness over dinner, as if she were simply stating the weather. My father just nodded along in total agreement while my sister took a slow sip of her wine with a smug grin. I did not break down or shout back. I just acknowledged the statement because my lifelong devotion vanished right then and there. Growing up in our quiet suburban home in Ohio, nobody ever handed me a rulebook explaining my secondary status. It was a silent, undeniable rhythm built into our daily routine where all the warmth and focus rushed toward my sister Nora, leaving me with the cold leftovers. Nora possessed this magnetic pull that made the entire household revolve around her moods, her triumphs, and her constant minor emergencies. I was always labeled the resilient one, which I eventually realized was just code for the kid they could safely ignore. My parents loved me in a distant, theoretical sort of way, constantly reminding me how glad they were that I was so fiercely self-reliant. That praise was actually a boundary line warning me never to voice my own needs or disrupt my sister's spotlight. Nora received custom designer cakes and elaborate birthday celebrations, while my milestones were marked with generic grocery store desserts bought at the very last minute. By the time I left for a local state college, I packed my own car alone without a single tearful goodbye. Living in Chicago years later, the established dynamic remained completely untouched during our brief, superficial phone calls. My mother would give a perfunctory nod to my career updates before immediately pivoting to whatever dramatic crisis Nora was navigating that week. I became an expert at playing the supportive background character in my own family, shrinking my existence so they could flourish. What truly shattered me at that dinner table was not discovering my rank, but seeing how proud they were to finally say it out loud. In the weeks following that evening, the silence from their end was deafening, yet the entitled demands arrived right on schedule. My mother sent a casual text asking me to cover Nora's childcare, while Nora forwarded a notification about her bounced car payment accompanied by a joking text. They never actually asked for my help because my compliance had always been completely guaranteed. This time, I chose not to respond, letting my phone vibrate on the desk while I quietly enjoyed my evening. A strange shift occurred when I refused to dive into their chaos, as the world kept spinning without my immediate intervention. Eventually, the casual requests transformed into demanding messages questioning why I was being so distant and cold. I was quiet because I was finally auditing my life and realizing how much financial and emotional equity I had wasted on people who viewed me as a backup plan. I quietly locked down my bank accounts, revoked shared access, and replied to Nora's next request with a flat refusal. The immediate pushback arrived via a tense phone call from my mother, who claimed Nora was facing unprecedented pressure and desperately needed her sister. I knew the drill inside out, but I finally understood that her inability to manage her adult life was no longer my problem to solve. That realization was the true catalyst for what happened next, shifting my perspective from compliance to absolute self-preservation. They were about to test my new boundaries in a massive way, and I was finally ready for the confrontation. The inevitable emergency call hit on a frantic Tuesday afternoon, with my mother sounding utterly desperate as she begged me to drive down for the weekend. When I walked into their house, the living room looked like a war zone of past due notices, legal threats, and chaotic stacks of financial paperwork. Nora sat weeping on the sofa while my dad stared blankly at the wall, completely unwilling to meet my eyes. My mother immediately launched into a frantic explanation about a failed business venture and catastrophic investment decisions. They all stared at me with hungry expectation, and my dad finally noted that since I was single and stable, I could easily carry this burden for them. The raw entitlement in the room was suffocating, as they fully expected me to sign away my savings to rescue Nora yet again. I looked at their desperate faces and calmly asked what their backup plan looked like if I chose to walk away. The room turned ice cold because they had never considered a reality where the family safety net simply refused to catch them. I demanded a full week to review the paperwork, using that time to consult with a financial advisor and a family attorney. When I returned to Ohio the following weekend, the atmosphere in the house was thick with anxiety as they waited to be rescued. My parents and Nora were tightly huddled around the dining table, watching me walk in with a heavy folder tucked under my arm. My father started rehearsing his speech about bad luck, but I cut through the noise and asked for the exact number. Nora choked out a staggering financial figure, and when I asked what structural changes they planned to make, my mother angrily accused me of interrogating them. I calmly stated that if it was not the time for questions, then it certainly was not the time for my money. Nora weaponized the concept of family loyalty, but I reminded her that loyalty is a two-way street, and nobody in that room had ever looked out for me. My dad argued that my financial stability meant I owed them this rescue, completely ignoring the years of sacrifice it took to build my life. I slid my legal folder across the mahogany table, watching their expressions turn from desperate hope to absolute horror as they read the strict terms. I offered a highly structured loan, not a handout, contingent on liquidating their luxury assets, undergoing strict credit monitoring, and committing to mandatory family therapy. My father furiously called the contract cold and corporate, comparing my boundaries to the ruthless tactics of a bank. I agreed with his assessment, reminding him that they had spent decades treating me like infrastructure rather than a daughter. Nora sobbed that I was destroying the family, but I told her I was simply ending the destruction of my own future. My mother tried to claim they never intended to make me feel lesser, but the signed contract on the table proved that intent no longer mattered. I gave them 24 hours to sign the paperwork or face the financial consequences alone, refusing to let their panic dictate my peace. They signed the documents the next morning in bitter silence, realizing the old dynamic was permanently dead. The healing process was agonizingly slow, defined by awkward therapy sessions where my family finally had to confront their deep-seated favoritism. Without my silent financial rescues, Nora was forced to grow up, and my parents finally had to manage their own reality. Back home, the constant anxiety left my chest, replaced by a profound sense of liberation every time I looked at my phone. I learned that establishing firm boundaries does not mean you stop loving your family. It just means you refuse to let them destroy you.